Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Well, you guys know we've been talking about the border for, it seems like 2 years now, but really 4 years now because it's been such a disaster. And I really do believe that it was the economy and the border that had the biggest effect in this election. And that's the reason that Donald Trump is in office or will be in office on January 20th. But interestingly, behind the scenes, Texas has been working incredibly hard to try to stop the invasion at the border. And one of the people who has stepped up is Commissioner Dawn Buckingham. Commissioner, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it is great to be on with you.
I'm really excited about everything you're doing. I think that a land commissioner is something I'm learning about. I'm like, oh, what is a land commissioner and what does a land commissioner do? But you've offered land to the Trump administration to go in and get these bad guys and take them out of the country and kind of organize things there, of which there are many. And I think the numbers are sort of shocking, but you recently had an op-ed where you detailed all the numbers of people who should actually be taken out of the country for committing crimes. It's just stunning.
It is amazing. And, in general, no one knows what the General Land Office Commissioner in Texas does. So just for a little background, we take care of veterans. We do everything coast. We do the disaster recovery. We run the Alamo. We do a lot of different things. But of course, we steward 13 million acres, and that revenue from that land funds education. And that's kind of how we acquire and run property. And you're exactly right. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of criminals who have been released multiple times under similar charges for hurting our sons and daughters, and we're just not going to tolerate it anymore. I look at Alexis, who is Jocelyn Initiative's mother. She is such a strong lady. And she's like, Jocelyn's voice was taken from her. Jocelyn was taken from me, but my voice will speak for Jocelyn, for justice for Jocelyn. And I don't want another child to have to die in that manner. I don't want another parent to have to suffer that pain. So anything that we can do to help the Trump administration get these violent criminals off of our soil, we are all in to be a good partner.
You've talked about the fact that you don't want people to have to suffer that. And as a parent, we both know that's a terrifying thought of losing your child. And I can't imagine what Jocelyn's mom is going through. When you've talked to her, as a parent, we've seen Laken Riley's mom come out. We've seen Jocelyn's mom come out. These parents, they don't stop, though. That to me is the most impressive thing. She's not stopping, and she wants the story told. And it's such a sensitive thing because when we hear it on the news, the leftist media always comes out and says, stop talking about it because you're using it for a political advantage. But if you don't talk about tragedies like this, they reoccur. And we saw that in a short amount of time with Laken Riley, with Jocelyn, with Ruby Garcia here in Michigan, a constant array of crimes that are against women. So when you talk to these parents, how do they keep going? How do they keep staying out there in the public?
Honestly, I think the pain of their loss fuels them, and they have to use it in a positive direction. I've actually had 3 really close friends lose their children through various accidents or fentanyl or whatever it is. And there's a pain there that never goes away. There's a hollowness. Part of you, it's like losing an arm. It's like losing a leg. There's part of you that is just missing. And so I think these moms in particular are just really strong. And I think the leftist media is trying to change this story because they don't want to be honest about the effects of the Biden administration when they're abdicating their duty to protect our border and letting these criminals in. And they also don't want to talk about the effects of the sanctuary policies that have let these criminals out over and over and over again. And just imagine the person you love most in the world, and imagine they have a terrible death. Imagine being Laken Riley's mom and listening to that 18-minute 911 call where her daughter is being raped and beaten to death. And yet, that law enforcement had their hands on that person. They were detained multiple times, and multiple times they let them walk right out the front door of the jail. That is inexcusable. And so there is no excuse for these sanctuary policies that when we've got someone who's arrested that's got a nice detainer, that person should go, or that person should be fully evaluated. You shouldn't just let them walk out the door under a sanctuary policy.
And they try to cover up what you just said about these people have been arrested multiple times. The police officers have had their hands on them. You talked about a friend who lost a child to fentanyl. It's the same. It's the same thing. It's the open border. And oftentimes these people have also been arrested. Now, Donald Trump has talked about stiff penalties for anybody who is dealing fentanyl. I mean, he's talked about some of the stiffest penalties. What are your feelings on this? You talk about this land. Has he come back to you and said anything about what he could do, how you could work together?
Well, I was actually with Tom Homan a few days ago, and he said they're definitely coming up with what their strategic plan is. We've also identified properties. You know, we have 13 million acres, so we have properties all over the state. So we've identified other properties they might be interested in. You know, and we'll see what they come up with. But we're just all in. You know, Texas has been standing in that gap. We've been passing laws actually that increase all the penalties to a maximum for selling fentanyl, for trafficking children, for all of those kinds of things. And a lot of people are kind of looking to Texas now and going, ooh, there's some things that we can do as a state to help with this problem as well. So we're happy to be an example. We're happy to help any state that needs to stiffen up their penalties to get rid of these criminals. But we want these violent criminals off of our soil who are killing our sons and daughters.
I think people get nervous when they hear mass deportation because they're like, oh, what does that mean? Are you sending families away? Are you tearing people apart? But you have some interesting numbers. As of July 21st of this year, there were 662,566 illegal aliens in the country that we know of with a criminal history. And they're on the ICE docket. I mean, these are people that we know of, and we know there's a heck of a lot more that have committed crimes that we don't know of. Of those, 435,719 of them were convicted criminals. 226,847 have pending criminal charges. Only 14,994 of them were in federal custody. When we talk about sending ICE out to do their job, man, it's a 4-year catch-up.
It really is. It's going to take a long time to round up the criminals. And you're exactly right. We don't really know how many there are because so many people came across that weren't counted. So many people came across that haven't come across law enforcement yet. But what we do know is that they are repeat offenders. So the numbers are low. I mean, it's just what they got caught for. And when you look at the crime within marginalized communities, if you're a legal immigrant and someone rapes your daughter, you're probably not going to report that to law enforcement, right? And so when you've got marginalized communities, which is also what we're trying to fix, then even more bad things happen. And so we just want people to come here legally. We want to enjoy the American dream. We want to break the chains that these cartels enslave these folks that come across. The way they came across, I mean, they are owned by the cartels. They're either going to be selling their body or selling drugs. There's not a free person that I know of that has come across this border. They come across basically owned by the cartels and the most violent gangs in the country. And we see these Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes. We see all kinds of things happening that are absolutely unacceptable. It's why we have to eliminate the sanctuary policies. It's why we have to go aggressively after these criminals, and we want them off our soil.
We've talked about that in great detail, and I've tried to explain to people in Michigan that nobody comes across that border freely. This is not a free people coming in and saying, I found a free land and I want to have a free life. They come across owned by the cartel. They are now forever beholden to the cartel. And as much as we as Americans and the American government may not know where they are, the cartel always does. And they will find them and they will use them and they will abuse them. This is a very nasty situation to have an open border. It's very cruel. It's not humanitarian. It's quite the opposite. It is very abusive to children. It's very abusive to all people that come across. And I think like when we talk about it, we try to explain to people, these are kids. They're coming across, but sometimes they're kids that are horribly abused, and sometimes they're kids who are abusers themselves. And we don't think of that because There are not many children that grow up and have the life that some of these kids that come from these horribly dangerous countries come from. So you may have a 15-year-old that comes across the border. I have a 15-year-old. My daughter, I can't imagine committing crimes or doing any of these things. She's not had that life, you know? I could mistakenly have her date a 15-year-old boy thinking that they've had the same life and he's in a gang. You know, this is the danger of this open border. You are owned by someone else. And no matter where you are in the country, you're owned by someone else. I think you obviously see it in a greater number in Texas than we see in Michigan, but it is increasing in Michigan. It's hidden here. I think that's the difference is here there's nooks and crannies, and the government has offered hotel owners in the state of Michigan money to house them. They've offered hotel owners, they've offered churches. We've had people come to us and say, we were offered a massive amount of money to shut our hotel down and take migrants in. I mean, you look at the situation in New York where you have the Roosevelt Hotel that's completely filled with migrants now, and the government is paying, and all of this money is changing hands. And now we find out this hotel is owned by someone in another country, and we're paying that country money to house these migrants. I mean, the whole thing is bananas when you break it down. But you said something interesting. These communities become very dangerous because these people, the women especially, feel they can't go to the government and say, I've been attacked, I've been raped, and I imagine the men the same are being extorted and everything else because they cannot go to the government and say, I need help, because they would get deported. So how is it safe to have a Roosevelt Hotel that is filled with people who are committing crimes and holding people hostage or raping people or beating people or whatever they're doing, and no one can speak out against it?
No, I think you make an exceptional point. I've also heard stories that if a migrant comes here and they do try to thwart what the cartels want them to do, they go back to their original country and kill their whole family. The cartels do. And then you talk about the hundreds of thousands of missing children. Why is that not being shouted from the mountaintops? It is inexcusable to have hundreds of thousands of children who are missing. And I can probably tell you why they're missing. They're missing because they're tucked in some corner, some awful place being trafficked. That's why they're missing. It's unacceptable to lose that many children. Ironically, I'm happen to be at a conference with elected officials from across the country, and I am telling these stories to these elected officials, and they're looking at me in disbelief. And I'm like, I feel like we have been shouting this for years. This is not new news. And yet just people in our country just don't know. They just don't understand the depth and the breadth of the problem. And again, we want safe communities. The basic function of government is to defend those that cannot defend themselves. That is the fundamental function of government. When you are allowing violent criminals, repeat offenders back out on the street with no consequence, that is absolutely unacceptable. It is the worst thing you could possibly do. So you're right. I mean, we cannot shout from the mountaintops enough what's happening here, but we need these violent criminals who are hurting our sons and daughter off of our soil.
We saw the 2-year-old a few days ago who came in and they asked, where's mommy and daddy? And she just said somewhere in the United States. How does that happen? How often does that happen? How can you possibly have a toddler cross the border alone? As a mom, I just cannot understand it. And I cannot understand it because if those parents were found, they would be put in jail in the United States. Because if I put my 2-year-old on a train and said, hey, go to Florida, I'll meet you there in a few days, I would be put in prison. I mean, these are criminal offenses. This is, it's so beyond what you could even imagine as a parent. I look at it and I go, we are so used to this now that people go, oh yeah, that's sad. No, what? How does it happen?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point. She obviously wasn't changing her own diapers as she was making her trek. She was obviously in the hands of somebody, probably not an upstanding person. But it's heartbreaking what's happening to these children. And who would want children brought into the country marginalized like that? That's not the way to enter. That's not how to have a part of the American dream. The way to have a part of the American dream is to come here legally, and safely. And what has been happening is so unacceptable. Ironically, this ranch that the initial property that we've offered the Trump administration is in a county called Starr County, obviously right on the border. That county, for the first time in 150 years, voted Republican. It voted for Donald Trump. And so that speaks to the fact that the people along the border, and I always like to remind everybody, the border towns are lovely communities. The people who live there are amazing. The Valley in Texas actually has a hospitality exceptional, even for Texas. They're wonderful people, but they are sick and tired of their communities being marginalized. They are sick and tired of people getting put in front of them who came here later. If you're in line right now trying to immigrate legally, you're waiting a really long time because the system is so clogged with everybody who came here illegally that it's slowing down all the people who've already been waiting years for their green cards or whatever it is. And so, all we're doing is hurting the people who are trying to do it right. All we're doing is rewarding bad behavior. All we're doing right now with the Biden administration is enriching the cartels and the most violent gangs. And that is just not the path that this country needs to be on.
It's interesting because it seems like some Democrats are reluctantly on board. I think they're actually less than reluctantly. I think they're enthusiastically on board. They don't feel like they can say it. We've heard some Democrats come out and say, well, I didn't think I could say this during the campaign or that during the campaign. And now I feel comfortable saying this. Just earlier this week, we heard Mayor Eric Adams in New York City come out and say, I don't care if you're going to try to cancel me. I'm going to make sure that the people of my city are safe. And he went on to say there has been an amazing amount of crime, that people don't feel comfortable, that he has a serious problem, and he is going to work with ICE to make sure it is taken care of. Do you think that you talked about this county that just went red. Do you think that there is a huge change in this country to say, man, we've been tricked?
I hope so, because the country has been tricked. The talking points, I just call it laughable hypocrisy. When Kamala Harris during the campaign said she secured the border and shut down the cartels, I almost fell out of my chair. But anyway, I'm glad
It's just lies. But that's the bizarre part about what's happening in elections. And I think that has been sort of eye-opening as well. They've used all of these lies and these manipulations and these scare tactics. And I mean, in Michigan in the past, it was like, if you don't come out and vote for us, you're not going to get marijuana. That's the way we're going to get you out. And then it's abortion. And then it was, you're a horrible person if you don't accept an open border. And then suddenly it was like people went, we're just being lied to, because ultimately they get back in power. We have a dangerous border. We have a terrible economy. We have a population disaster. Everything is going to hell. And I think the American people had to see a Joe Biden administration for 4 years to see we have got to make a serious change. Do you think that change is permanent?
I think in a way, it's a blessing that there was a gap between the two Trump administrations, because people got to see a direct contrast between the two. The numbers are amazingly different between where we were 4 years ago when Trump was leaving office and where we are today, where Biden is leaving office. And let's remember that Biden actually called the majority of Americans trash not too long ago. And it's amazing to me and I'm glad, but it's amazing to me that people saw through the hypocrisy, because the mainstream media and how they portray and what they don't talk about and how they want to squelch what the real story is was pretty impressive. And obviously, the message wasn't getting out fully, but at least it got out enough that the American people could stand up and go, look, these policies are not for me. Look, these policies are hurting my community. It's putting my children in jeopardy, the people that I love in jeopardy, and we want safety and economic prosperity back again.
Well, even as a state senator, you were elected in a very blue area as a Republican. I mean, obviously, we've been watching Texas for years because we've seen this mass migration from California to Texas, like this movement to get out of California. And everybody's like, okay, but don't bring those politics to Texas. And we've been hearing Texas is going blue. Texas is going blue. Obviously, there was a kerfuffle or blow up. Oh, Senator Cruz is not going to win, and he won overwhelmingly. So do you think that this has held off a lot of what they thought was going to be a blue wave in Texas, and now it's actually shifting more to the right again?
Absolutely. I was victory chair for the Republicans of Texas in 2018, which was Senator Cruz's race against Beto. And we averaged 500 miles a day, kicked off multiple rallies for him a day. I mean, it was a full court press. And it was great to see him come back even stronger. And win, honestly, against a better candidate. Colin Allred is articulate, former professional athlete, a real life of service in Congress. So it was good. I think, as we see consistently the cities outvote the rural areas, there aren't very many blue states. There are a lot of states that have some big red dots some big blue dots in the cities that outvote the rural areas. But yes, I think with the mass migration of the Californians coming in, with Texas shifting just our various population percentages of various ethnic groups, I think everybody assumed that it was going to flip. Well, let me tell you, the Hispanic community has conservative values naturally. They've just been told they're Democrats their whole life, but generally they believe in Jesus, they're family oriented, they're entrepreneurial, hardworking. And so when we go, we do, I kind of consider it my evangelical work. I walk a lot into non-traditional communities and just be present. And sometimes I'm the first Republican that they've met. Sometimes definitely the first Republican who's asked for their vote. I was endorsed in my race by several entities, and I was probably in one entity, I was the first Republican they had ever endorsed. And in the other one, I was the only one out of about 400 races that was a Republican that they endorsed. And so I just walk into these communities. I kind of lose the tags a little bit, but represent just our our beliefs and what we stand for, and let them know we're bringing solutions for their communities. And I think it helps. It helps for them to see, it helps the horns fall off. The media paints all of us as being so terrible. And so we just kind of get those horns off. We come and be present. We're friendly, and we're just going to keep doing it. But I think this showed that Texas is strong. Texas is going to continue to be strong. But we're also going to have to keep working and being sure that as people move in, they don't bring some of their politics. There's a reason they left those other states, so they should probably not try and turn us into that.
I think there's a real movement among Republicans in the last few years to say we're going into the areas we haven't historically gone into. And I mean, even when I was running, there was this discussion of, oh, you can't win there, don't waste your time. You can't win here, don't waste your time. And I think that's not been, that's changed in such a short period of time, where Donald Trump's like, I'm going into any area. I'm going to step in. And we were fortunate when I was running that we had some of those groups come to us. But now it's time to open our possibilities, open our minds to going out and meeting the folks who we think hate us. And they've tried to convince us that they hate us. And yet they don't hate us. In fact, we share more in common with the majority of America than I think that the Democrats do by far. I mean, you see a real unity coming together around Donald Trump. You see Democrats saying, I'll work with him if he's willing to do this and he's willing to do that. That is not how Joe Biden was acting. I mean, the funny thing is, Joe Biden was the one that was like, I'm not going to work with anybody that's Trump, anybody that's MAGA, anybody that's Republican. So I think that we're seeing a whole new United States of America, and actually it's reminiscent of old times. So it's bringing the country back together. Before I let you go, just explain a little bit about the Jocelyn Initiative, what people out here can do to kind of support you in that.
Well, the Jocelyn Initiative was just taking it that extra step further. We had originally identified that 1,400-acre property that we literally just acquired a month ago, and we're going to have that wall finished probably next week, which is super exciting to move it that fast. But I reached out to Alexis, Jocelyn's mother, because I want to be really careful and protect them. And I said, I'd like to name this initiative after Jocelyn. I would like to do, I want to keep her at the forefront of people's memory. So that we know her story, so it hopefully never repeats again. And it was great having her with me at the press conference. But basically, we're just aggressively looking for properties all around the state. Anything the Trump administration might need, we're partnering with them and saying, look, how can we be helpful? How can we help these violent criminals get off of our soil? Our jails are fully overcrowded with them, to get that burden off the local officials. And so it's just us saying, we're in. We're doing whatever we can, whatever property I have, whatever you need from the General Land Office. We are here to help get these violent criminals off our soil who are raping and murdering our sons and daughters.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're also talking about land that will be available for border wall construction. And we know the border wall was the big issue in 2016. Joe Biden sadly threw all of that border wall construction material away. So here we are starting at square one again. But it sounds like you've been working behind the scenes very hard on this. So we appreciate everything you've done. And I appreciate you being here today.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. It was great being on with you, and you have a great day.
Absolutely. Everybody check her out. She is Commissioner Dawn Buckingham in Texas. We appreciate what you do over there. And we thank all of you for joining us on this podcast today. For this episode and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com. You can subscribe right there, or go to the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time. Have a blessed day.